Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another video about my personality disorder. If you didn't know, I'm a diagnosed narcissist, but before I say the things I'm going to say in this video, keep in mind that I am not a licensed professional, so with that out of the way, there's been something that I've been thinking of quite often. I mean, technically, I already made a video about this, if you've seen the one a while back when I talk about Carl Jung's, idea of the shadow, but there are more thoughts that I've been having about the shadow, so to speak, or the unconscious, the subconscious, whatever is technically the proper term to use in whatever that I'm going to talk about. Now, I wanted to explore a few more thoughts, I guess, within the narcissistic condition, or at least my narcissistic condition. I'm not going to speak for anybody else, but one thing that I've been thinking about, and I think you'd understand it better if you saw my video talking about how I kind of just think that everything is attention seeking anyway. So just watch the video, I think, called Narcissist Talks About Attention Seeking, for me to further delve in on that, to provide perhaps more context and clarity for where I'm coming from in the context of this video with all the things that I'm going to be talking about. But basically, I've been thinking about it a lot more, and I'm kind of wondering, is there ever anything that we do as people that isn't essentially performative in some sense? I guess you can say the ego and whatnot. I'm really fixated on ego. Well, yeah, no shit. Being a narcissist, oh my gosh, must protect the ego at all costs. But when I look at a whole bunch of people in general, I really only just see ego, to be honest, because that's where a lot of conflict comes from. Disagreements in philosophy, disagreements in religion, disagreements in politics, whatever, you name it. There's always an opposing side. And when I see the entire world, I just think, yes, this world is just ego driven for status. Who has the most money? Who's the most attractive? Who's the most, blah, blah, blah. It's all just some sort of dumb, arbitrary video game. And I've always felt like our entire lives are just lies in general, and nothing ever actually feels real to me. And I guess because I feel constantly empty, and I see the illusion of the ego, which I'm desperately trying to maintain as a narcissist and prop myself up that, okay, I'm fine and I'm put together. But what tires me about this life is, does nobody else really think that we're all constantly just playing pretend? Because when you think of the notion of, oh my gosh, you have such a fragile ego, how does it not apply to everybody else in general? Because I'm sure we've all had a reaction that maybe people would say is disproportionate, and oh, you have such a fragile ego. And the same people who say that have probably also had a moment in their lives where people called them the ones having, a fragile ego and whatnot. So, what exactly does that entail, having a fragile ego? A lot of people's beliefs, let's say values, or the script that they tell themselves every single day, it's always something that, they need to maintain just to feel better about themselves. And the more I see conflict in the world, the more I see disagreements or even just my own doubt. I'm a pretty skeptical person, as I've always been. And when it comes to philosophy, I've delved a lot in, skepticism and whatnot. And I don't know, my entire life, everything just feels pretty questionable in general. So, as a narcissist, or I guess even just epistemologically, why would we not have fragile egos? And it kind of destroys the concept that there is such a thing as oh, a subconscious, if you ask me, or this idea of an unconscious, and that if you were simply just better developed, then you would simply, maintain and manage your life better. That's why people like self-development, or in Jungian terms, this is why people like shadow work, or people, you know, yeah, whatever, all of that kind of stuff. But I really do just see it as a sham, because even Carl Jung said, okay, in order to, get a better grip and control over yourself, I think he said something along the lines of, you must make the unconscious conscious. So everything is still filtered through ego in a sense. It's trying to force the ego to perhaps accept things about yourself that are, not as easily recognizable or perhaps hidden. I hear this thing called like a Freudian slip, even, where if you accidentally say something that your quote unquote ego didn't necessarily like mean to say, it reveals something about your subconscious. But that's where I kind of think it's just a lie. And the notion of like a subconscious or the unconscious mind just like falls apart to me, or the whole idea falls apart to me, because basically all we have is our fragile ego. And a lot of people say that if you delve into your subconscious, if you delve into your unconscious, yes, quote unquote, you'll have a better grip on yourself, you'll have a better understanding of yourself, and you'll be able to like navigate life better and whatnot. But I mean, isn't that not just what the isn't that pretty much just what the ego is trying to do, just in more like sophisticated terms that, if you ask me in all honesty, don't really mean anything? Because I think where I struggle with this idea of like the subconscious or like the unconscious mind is that it's pretty much untestable, even in a subjective sense. And I was talking to one of my friends about it recently. I told her like, oh, um, yeah, it is probably a very like unconventional take to have, because people want to assume that there is like more depth to them and whatnot. But it's a sham. And she kind of agreed with me, actually. She told me that everything is basically within, the conscious experience, even if you don't realize it, because I have no idea if bits of the quote unquote like unconscious can actually come out, and that's how you have this like idea of like a Freudian slip. But at least like as my experience as a narcissist in particular, is that not just your ego constantly trying to, rewrite itself? Because the idea of being like fully individuated or having like a fully like developed sense of self, even for people that are, let's say, not, individuals with like cluster B disorders, like such as myself, that don't necessarily struggle with like emptiness, they say that the idea of like the subconscious and the unconscious mind, there's always depth to us that we will never like truly know just on the surface. But I don't know, it sounds fake to me, because everything about your life is trying to bring something on the surface, and that's basically where the ego is. And if the ego doesn't work, it simply just, like falls apart. And there's this idea that, yes, again, if you were just more individuated, if you just had like a better understanding of like your subconscious and unconscious mind, you would do a whole lot better. But it sounds kind of unrealistic to me. So if you have like opposing ideas, leave them in my comments. I'm sure it'd be quite interesting to read. I don't believe in the notion of being fully individuated, or I don't believe in the notion. This is perhaps a very like unconventional take to have. Well, I am mentally ill as it goes, and I already struggle with like my sense of self, all the time. So when I think of people that are constantly trying to like, develop and understand, you know, the hidden depths of themselves, I just see people trying to like rewrite their egos and rewrite their defenses better. Because like, if you think about it, why do people even get interested in like doing quote unquote like shadow work, or doing quote unquote like, oh, I want to learn more about my unconscious, I want to learn more about me? Because they think of times where perhaps they struggled to understand people or whatever. That's why people are interested in like typology, for example, because like, oh, it gives us a better like navigation system in order to like understand other people better. I'm an INTP, by the way, at the best of like my evaluation MBTI wise. But anyway, if it's always motivated by ego, at least if you ask me, then the idea of a, subconscious or an unconscious mind just sounds so unrealistic to me, because I guess like logically it literally just like falls apart to me. You're saying there are things that are hidden about yourself that you don't easily know, but that sort of does imply that you would have to know, because how would you know that there are things hidden if you didn't know the quote unquote things that are hidden? So it sounds like a falling apart cope. And I guess in a very more like sophisticated way of like putting this, I guess I just have like a very like Buddhist perspective of I guess like the failure of the notion of like the self to begin with, because in Buddhism, it's a very common teaching that, desire is the root of all suffering. And what I was talking about earlier in terms of like, there are moments where the ego perhaps failed and people don't like those uncomfortable feelings. So when they read more about psychology and they read more about like human behavior, is that not just a way of like, again, rewriting your ego to like be prepared when those like moments actually happen? But it's never actually gonna work, if you ask me, because if everything has to be filtered through the ego, because the ego is everything that comes about on the surface, then the idea of a subconscious is something that I just find like completely idealized and it has no place. Or the idea of a self could, as you've heard about me talk in like a lot of videos, like the idea of the self itself could just like, easily be destroyed when you consider things like eliminative materialism, for example. I have like my own video about that because we know that as people, we are not omniscient. At least as a narcissist, I can pretend to quote unquote like, oh, I know everything. I've pissed off and annoyed a lot of people when they say like, oh, you act like you know everything, blah blah blah. I'm just like, yes, because it's all ego. That is the entire ego's purpose. It's trying to make you think that you do know everything. It's trying to make you think that your everyday generalizations about life are constantly going to work the way that they do. But I don't know, if you just take things like the problem of induction, you know, or if you consider a philosophy like nominalism, you can't prove, I have my own video about nominalism too. You can't prove that, your generalizations or like your universals actually exist, because I guess this is almost like delving into like philosophy of like time like section here, but it's like, I don't know, A theory, B theory, whatever. Like, yeah, there's like, all these terms that I might have to like, brush up on. But basically, you can't test the future because the future technically never happens. Like, you're just in the present. Whatever is the label in the context of making the problem of induction work here. Yes, you will never know if everything you think just, happens, the way that it does just because it happened so many times like this in the past. That is the problem of induction in a nutshell. So if you take that and you apply it to like, your own consciousness, it just doesn't work because we have a very like epistemological problem when it comes to, like, I don't know, I guess like determining like ultimate truth or whatever. Just like look at epistemological nihilism. Just look at like, I don't know, things, a lot of things in like philosophy that put about like skepticism and whatnot. So when I think of like the shadow in a very like Jungian sort of way, I truly do just think darkness. But the shadow is a metaphor that there is something hidden, behind the darkness that could be, achieved. But we all die. So when I think about it like realistically and I see, or at least like if I were to conceptualize like the shadow of life, it's always death. And humans are always desperate. And we're trying our best to survive thanks to like the duping of our survival instinct, whether or not that like we are actually happy. So like what every single time like I process it, trying to look like beyond my ego or trying to look like, beyond like the construction of like my quote unquote like self, I legitimately just see nothing. And I think like, and what perpetuates me to say that like the subconscious or like the unconscious doesn't actually exist, because I truly do believe that when people think that like they're getting like better like self-development or like stuff like that, they are just, in their ego, but they're polishing the shield so that their ego can get better. They never actually left their ego. Because if you were to like, leave your ego and you find out just how like flawed you are and how little you know and just how, oh, you need your political beliefs to stand every single day. You need your religious beliefs to stand every single day. You need your philosophical beliefs to like stand every day. Like, it's all ego. It's all rationalization, because I guess this is also a philosophical video anyway. Like, knowledge just seems impossible. So if you can't figure out the world, how much more can you, be able to like, like figure out yourself? You can't figure out like the universe, then it's like, oh, you as this tiny speck, like this tiny speck's experience is like somehow more like, I don't know, important. Like it literally all just feels like pretend. So I don't know. Yeah, I think about it and just like I just don't know what isn't performative in this life. I just don't understand when something is like genuine or quote unquote like authentic, because when I see people that are, like that, they just look like posers to me. Or the way that they function is that like they just have this thing called ignorance is bliss, because if they were honest and they saw where everything was like headed. I'm not saying that people don't understand the concept of death. They obviously do. But leaving your ego is basically the only understanding I believe that you get about like the cognitive, sort of like dissonance about life. Because when I think of it like in reference of like the shadow, and a shadow is, basically like a dark like silhouette. Darkness should only contain darkness. Otherwise, it's not even an actual, sort of like shadow. So I mean, I get that it's in a way like very, very like metaphorical, but like the metaphor just like doesn't work for me. And I self-reflect and I just think to myself, okay, how can I convince myself that other people are stupider than me? That and I feel like I'm the only one that can pretty much admit that. Or maybe like other narcissists that like, truly get it, or other cluster B people that just like truly get it, because like existing is just so much, like desperation, and nobody likes their shields like being destroyed, which is why almost anything has a very like decent amount of like making it sound like it's a social media account, which is like dumb. But like, well, I'm just gonna say it, like almost a lot of things have like a decent amount of like followers within it. But for example, nihilism is always a topic that makes people like extremely uncomfortable, because yeah, I think like leaving the ego is just stepping into darkness. And maybe I'm a hypocrite in a way, because I'm always trying to like, like maintain my ego. But I think like that's the curse of being a human, which is why I think that like if you were to examine life, or if you were to like truly examine yourself, like you're just desperate. Yes, your ego is very fragile. Having an ego as a human being will always keep us very fragile. And truth be told, you're just lost and you don't want to exist experiencing contradictions, no matter how many times you tell yourself that, oh, I'm open-minded, I'm this or I'm that. Which is why I think religion works with like a lot of people, and which is why people are stupid to think that like you always need like faith in everything. I don't have faith in anything. I'm trying, I guess, because like, oh look, I'm still here. But truth be told, it's just an existential crisis every single day. Everything's just a giant question mark. And I don't know, maybe you can only truly be established like if you were to somehow become like omniscient, but it's simply just impossible for a person to do. So I think we idealize the notion of having depth, but like truthfully, it's just like not there. And the only thing holding ourselves up is the best distraction that you can find. I'm probably running in a circle at this point. But yeah, I guess I just wanted to expand upon that video that I made before. I did sort of watch it when I was like already talking about like the shadow and whatnot, but I think like a lot of the things that I didn't necessarily include, I'm just like, what isn't performative? How do people just not think that like we're playing pretend? I feel like we're truly just playing pretend. Nothing is authentic. Nothing is genuine, because oh, like people feel high and mighty when they call other people, oh, you have such a fragile ego, but like that means nothing to me. I don't know, like dissing somebody for having a fragile ego is just, a cognitive like dissonance way of saying that my ego works better than yours, so I don't have to recognize it as an ego, when truth be told, it's still an ego. Because with so many contradicting and like conflicting sort of like ideas, we shatter each other's egos all the time. And that is why people need confirmation bias. That is why there are red states in the United States. There are blue states in the United States. There are like if you go to like any area, you can find like similar patterns as to like why this particular group of people decided to like, like meet up here, because it's all cognitive dissonance. It's all trying to like, maintain and polish the shield that, oh, we don't exist egotistically because we just exist the right way. But if that were the case, then why would the world function that way? But, inevitably, we just exist in this entire world trying to maintain our egos and trying to destroy other people's egos that dare to contradict the script that we desperately need to hold on to in terms of religious beliefs, philosophical beliefs, values, whatever you want to call it. But then, without it, look within. And if you ask me, it's just like, yeah, it truly is just darkness. There's no real expression. It's just a silence because there is no self, I guess. Or maybe it's just something that I will actually only understand along with like my other cluster B people. But yeah, to like wrap this up, subconscious, unconscious mind, that's the biggest scam I've ever heard.